Why did the general's face turn pale, just from reading a single word? The metallic click of a firing pin sliding into place echoed through the underground armory, sharp and clean like a metronome marking the silence. Specialist barely noticed. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, fingers gliding across rifle components as if they were extensions of herself. It wasn't thought. It wasn't effort. It was rhythm, muscle memory. A ritual she had repeated thousands of times, each motion precise, each click of steel predictable. But across the room, a man who had seen battlefields and briefing rooms for 3 decades stood frozen, staring at her personnel file. General Harrison, career soldier, decorated strategist, a man not easily shaken, looked down at a column that should have contained numbers. Instead, it showed a single word, stamped in bold black ink. Redacted. He flipped the page, searching for an error, a missing entry, anything. But the deeper he read, the more the pages dissolved into black bars and red stamps. His clearance, top secret, special compartmented information, wasn't enough. He had read operations reports buried so deep the Pentagon barely admitted they existed. Yet here in this woman's file, his authority had reached a wall. And that wall terrified him. His eyes lifted from the folder. Across the rows of weapon racks, lit by the flicker of fluorescent tubes, she sat quietly at her workbench. A woman of 28, olive-toned hands stained faintly with oil, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Nothing extraordinary on the surface. Just another soldier assigned to weapon maintenance at Fort, a support base buried in the Virginia countryside. But there was something in the stillness of her movements, something in the way her eyes, dark, unflinching, met his when she finally looked up. And for the first time in his career, General Harrison felt the one thing men like him were trained to bury: fear. He cleared his throat, voice carrying more uncertainty than authority this time. Specialist. Her gaze lingered on him, calm but sharp, before she set the rifle down. General. One word, even tone, no deference, no trembling respect. The kind of reply that came from someone who had stared into the eyes of men far more dangerous than him and survived. He stepped forward, boots clicking against the concrete. The armory stretched out like a steel forest, rifles and carbines waiting silently in racks. To anyone else, it was just a maintenance bay. To him now, it felt like a stage, and she, the only performer who mattered. He held up the manila folder, its edges stamped in red classification seals. I've been conducting a review of personnel files. Her hands moved again, picking up another carbine. She began dismantling it without hesitation, barrel sliding free, firing pin disassembled with the practiced grace of a pianist. I have to say, he continued, his words careful, probing, yours makes for interesting reading. For a moment her fingers paused on the spring assembly, just a flicker. Then the motion resumed. I'm sure it does, she said quietly. Harrison turned another page, his throat tightening. The file was filled with fragments, technical scores beyond perfect, language proficiencies in dialects even he couldn't pronounce, training certifications across demolitions, combat medicine, infiltration. Skills layered like someone had been built, piece by piece, into a weapon. Yet none of it explained the blank space where the number should have been. He let out a slow breath. Marksmanship ratings impossible, languages 7, demolitions, infiltration, medical certification. For someone assigned to maintenance, his voice trailed off. You seem remarkably overqualified. The firing pin clicked neatly into place. She didn't look up. I like working with my hands. It was said with such simplicity it almost sounded true. Almost. But Harrison knew better. No one like this ended up here by accident. He flipped another page and froze. Photographs. Surveillance shots from rooftops in Kandahar. A grainy image from a market in Baghdad. A compound in Somalia circled in red. His stomach tightened. He had seen missions like these before. Missions buried under layers of deniability. The kind no one admitted existed. He turned to the next section, and his blood ran cold. The mission summaries were gone, entire paragraphs blacked out, whole operations swallowed in ink. And where there should have been a kill count, a precise number logged and filed, there was only that single word again. Redacted. His mouth went dry. 31 years in uniform. He had seen redactions before, but never like this. Never where his clearance didn't reach. He looked up, his composure slipping. Kill count redacted. Met his stare evenly, her hands finally still. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the lights above them. Some numbers, she said softly, are too large for record-keeping. The silence deepened. Harrison swallowed hard, searching her expression, trying to find something human: fear, pride, guilt. But her face was a mask, calm as stone. How many? He asked, voice dropping to a whisper. Her hands traced the worn steel of the rifle, fingers brushing scars in the metal that told of firefights and survival. Then her eyes lifted, dark and steady. Does it matter? He blinked. Does knowing the number change anything? She continued, voice even. Does it bring back the people who died? Does it make the world safer? Her words cut deeper than any classified stamp. Harrison exhaled slowly, the folder heavy in his hand. He had walked into the armory expecting routine, perhaps discipline problems, maybe. Instead, he had stumbled into something far more unsettling. This woman wasn't hiding, she wasn't proud, she wasn't ashamed, she simply carried it. And that somehow was worse. His eyes dropped again to the page, to the inked-over lines, to the absence of numbers. In that absence, he saw something chilling, the shape of wars fought in silence, victories never announced, sacrifices never recorded. He closed the folder slowly, his voice low. I've never seen a redaction I didn't have clearance for. Rose to her feet, her movements fluid, economical. She walked to the rifle rack, lifting another weapon with a reverence that looked almost like ritual. Her hands began to strip it down with the same quiet focus as before. Some operations, she murmured, aren't meant to be documented. The general studied her in silence. The armory stretched around them, rows of rifles waiting, shadows pressing in from the corners. And yet nothing in that room felt as dangerous as the woman in front of him, methodical, composed, and carrying secrets even he wasn't allowed to see. He wanted to press, to demand, to know, but part of him already feared the answer. For the first time in decades, a general of the United States Army found himself hesitating, not because of politics, not because of risk, but because of a single soldier who looked at him as if his authority meant nothing. And somewhere deep inside, he understood. It didn't. How do you separate the innocent from the guilty when they live under the same roof? General Harrison hadn't expected her to answer, not fully, but when finally spoke, the words carried a weight that hollowed the air between them. There was a compound in western Afghanistan, she said quietly. 6 weeks of my life lived in silence. They told me it was an orphanage. They didn't tell me what else it was. Harrison leaned forward, the folder closed but still heavy in his hand. His instincts told him to stop, to leave it sealed, but his curiosity, no, his need to understand, kept him rooted. Continued her work as she spoke, her fingers dismantling another rifle, laying each piece across the bench with ritual care. The routine steadied her voice. Intelligence said it doubled as a training ground. Suicide bombers, boys pulled from refugee camps, taught to wear vests they barely understood, trained to walk into markets, into schools, and disappear in fire. Her tone was flat, clinical, but Harrison saw the flicker in her eyes. The memory was there. And the children, he asked. Her hands stilled on the rifle's barrel. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she set it aside and reached for the firing pin assembly, her voice quiet. 37, real orphans, real victims, sleeping under the same roof as the men preparing them for death. The general felt a knot twist in his chest. He had seen moral complexity in battle, but never this. Never the impossible question written so plainly: save the children or stop the killers. Both, neither. What did you do? His eyes lifted, locking on his. What I had to. The silence stretched, and then slowly she told him. I studied them for 6 weeks, every person in that compound. I memorized their habits, their loyalties, their tells. Who lingered at evening prayers, who stayed with the children after lights out, who slipped into the main hall when the trainers gathered. I built a map of lives, who was guilty, who had chosen, and who had no choice at all. Her voice was steady, but Harrison knew what kind of discipline it took to speak like that, to force horror into the shape of words. I moved the aid workers first, she said, quietly, secured them in a storage wing. The children next, shifted them into a hall that I calculated would suffer the least structural damage. And the rest. Her fingers pressed against the steel of the bolt carrier group. They didn't walk out. The general's throat tightened. How many? Her eyes didn't waver. 17 in 43 minutes. The weight of the number hung in the armory like smoke. Not just a statistic, a decision. 17 choices, stacked one after another, precise and deliberate. No civilian casualties, she added softly. Not one. The children are still alive. The orphanage still stands, but the training ended that night. Harrison realized he had been holding his breath. His pulse drummed in his ears. And suddenly, the blacked-out file made sense. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. In his years of command, success was measured in territory gained, battles won, reports filed in Washington. But this was something different. A victory measured not by land or headlines, but by children who lived another day. And yet it wasn't triumph he saw in her face. It was weight. Set the rifle aside, her hands falling still at last. That's why the numbers are redacted, she said. Because numbers don't tell the truth. Because some victories aren't simple enough to fit into a report. Harrison studied her in silence. Her calm voice, the oil-stained fingers, the stillness that carried more tension than any battlefield he'd stood on. How do you live with that? He asked quietly. Her gaze flickered toward him. For a moment something almost human broke through the mask. A hint of weariness, a shadow of doubt. You don't, she said finally. You just keep moving, rifle to rifle, mission to mission, until one day you ask for something quieter, something that doesn't bleed. Her words landed with the kind of finality that silenced any further questions. The general sat back slowly, his throat tight. He had walked into this armory thinking he understood war, thinking he understood soldiers. But the woman across from him had lived in a war he couldn't name, fought battles that never appeared on maps, and carried ghosts that no medal or ribbon could redeem. And as she returned to her firing pins, as if nothing had been said at all, Harrison felt something he hadn't expected: respect. Respect and a quiet fear of the cost she bore in silence. What does it feel like to end a life you've studied for weeks, in less than a second? Didn't tell the general everything. Some things weren't meant for words. They lived in her hands, in her breath, in the silence of her memories. But as she worked through the line of rifles that night, her mind drifted back to places she had promised herself she would leave behind. A rooftop in Mosul. She could still feel the weight of the rifle pressed into her shoulder, the chill of concrete beneath her body. Through her scope, a crowded marketplace stretched below, vivid, noisy, alive. Families bartering, children weaving between stalls, smoke rising from vendors' fires. And in the middle of it all, one man. Her target. A man planning to detonate a truck bomb near a school. A man whose death would mean dozens of children going home that night instead of becoming names on a casualty list. Her heartbeat slowed as she watched him, breathing steady, movements precise. Time stretched. She counted the civilians between her and him, calculating angles, threading the invisible line of her shot through a maze of innocent lives. One breath in, one pause. The trigger broke cleanly. The man dropped before he hit the ground. The crowd scattered in confusion, panic blooming like wildfire. They never knew what had been prevented, never knew that they had walked inches from annihilation. To them, it was chaos without explanation. To her, it was one less nightmare. But the silence that followed had stayed with her. Silence where children had been saved, but also silence heavy with the weight of taking yet another life. Remembered lying there long after, her fingers still on the trigger, her scope sweeping the panicked crowd, looking not for enemies this time, but for evidence, for proof that she had been right, that the man she killed had truly been the one, that her bullet had bought life, not stolen it unjustly. That night she had been certain, but certainty didn't silence the echo. Her next memory wasn't a rooftop. It was a mountain trail in Pakistan, moonless and cold. She had tracked a man for 3 days through villages, along streams, into caves where shadows clung like smoke. He was a bomb maker, paranoid, elusive, clever. Every hour he changed his route, doubled back, tested for followers, but was more patient than him. Everyone had patterns, even the cautious. She studied the way he lit cigarettes only when he believed he was safe, the way he slept lightly but always shifted to his left side before dawn, the way his boots left deeper impressions on the rocky soil whenever he carried heavy equipment. She built a map of him, not just his movements but his mind. And when he finally thought he had shaken pursuit, when he sat alone in a cave surrounded by explosives and wires, she entered. He reached for a detonator. She was faster. 10 seconds. That was all it took to end 3 days of shadow chasing. 10 seconds to silence a man who had supplied bombs responsible for dozens of maimed children, dozens of graves unmarked by the public, but remembered by the families who grieved them. But when it was done, when she stood in that cave lit only by the dim glow of half-built devices, she felt no triumph. Only a deep exhaustion, a weight pressing into her chest, because each kill, no matter how justified, etched itself into her, a scar without blood. Had never killed for pleasure, never once. Every mission had been measured, calculated, confirmed beyond doubt. Each bullet meant lives saved, families intact, markets unshattered, schools left standing. And yet, the numbers added up anyway. 17 in Afghanistan, 12 in Iraq, 1 in Pakistan, sometimes just one, sometimes many, each a thread in the tapestry of a life she was trying desperately to unravel. She thought of the soldiers who carried the rifles she now repaired, their hands trembling in firefights, clutching at steel they prayed would not fail them. She thought of how much they trusted those weapons, how much she wanted them to never doubt them. And in that routine, in that mechanical certainty, she found something she hadn't felt in years. Control. A firing pin worked or it didn't. A spring held tension or it didn't. There was no morality in steel, no blurred lines, no ghosts in the chamber. Returned another rifle to its rack, her motion steady, her breathing calm. Around her, the armory hummed faintly with fluorescent light, the sound of an ordinary day at Fort. A base full of technicians, administrators, support personnel. People who had no idea who she really was or what kind of decisions her hands had carried. And that was how she wanted it. Because the truth wasn't something anyone should envy. The truth was that every quiet night, every dreamless sleep was stolen, bought at the cost of shadows that followed her, unrecorded and unseen. She pressed her hands flat against the cool steel of the workbench, oil stains seeping into her fingertips. For a moment, she closed her eyes. And the rifle she held wasn't a rifle. It was a memory. A rooftop, a cave, a choice. And choices never stopped echoing. How long can you pretend you're normal before the world reminds you you're not? Fort was nada. That was what repeated to herself every morning, as though the words could carve a barrier between who she was now and who she used to be. Here, there were no rooftop scopes, no three-day trails through mountains, no impossible choices between children and killers. Here, there was order, routine, rifles lined in neat rows, weapons waiting for care like patients in a quiet clinic. The hum of fluorescent lights, the steady scrape of steel, the clicks of pins and bolts sliding back into place, these were her battle rhythms now. And they were enough. Or so she told herself. By the time her shift ended, had inspected 23 rifles. 17 went back into circulation. 6 were tagged for replacement parts, numbers she could trust, numbers that didn't bleed. She left the armory quietly, her boots carrying her across the parade ground. Soldiers drilled in formation, their voices echoing in unison, their bodies moving with the certainty of discipline. She didn't join them. She didn't need to. Her war had already been fought in shadows they would never see. Her quarters were Spartan, stripped of everything except what she needed: a narrow bed, a desk with a secured laptop, a single chair, and a duffel folded against the wall. Years of operations had taught her to travel light. Attachments could weigh you down. Comfort could make you careless, and had learned the hard way that anything you grew to depend on could be taken from you. She sat at the desk, powering on her laptop, the screen glowing to life through layers of encrypted login prompts, maintenance logs, technical bulletins, reports on small arms readiness. This was her routine. This was safety. But tonight, the cursor blinked against a blank document. She stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard before beginning to type. Today someone asked me about the number. The words spilled into the empty page, simple but heavy. The redacted count that represents years of work that officially never happened. He wanted to understand, as if knowing the quantity would explain the weight, as if a number could carry what I carry. She paused. Her reflection flickered faintly in the screen, dark eyes rimmed with fatigue. Every number is a choice, a moment when one life was measured against many. Every number is a surveillance hour, a night without sleep, a bullet weighed against the possibility of massacre. But numbers don't tell the truth. Numbers don't scream in your head when the room goes quiet. Her fingers hovered, but she couldn't continue. The words were too raw, too close. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, and the hardness in her expression softened. A text from... Her sister's words were simple: thinking of you today. Hope all is well at the base. Lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Was 2 years younger, a nurse in a children's hospital in California, a healer, a life builder. She didn't know the details of service, only that her sister had been deployed, that she had returned, that some things were too heavy to talk about, and preferred it that way. Protecting her sister meant sparing her the truth. She typed back quickly, "All good here. Fixed a lot of rifles today, nothing exciting." It was true in its way. Didn't need to know what kind of ghosts rattled inside those rifles. Didn't need to know what kind of precision her sister had once wielded, not on steel but on lives. Leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. For a moment she let herself imagine what life was like. Patients healed. Children discharged from wards with smiles. Exhaustion, yes, but exhaustion born of giving life, not taking it. Sorry. She was about to shut down the laptop when a new notification appeared. An incoming email. No name, just a single address she recognized instantly. A name she hadn't seen in months. David. Her handler. Her chest tightened. She opened it, her breath caught between control and dread. Status check. The message was short, almost casual, but knew better. David never wasted words. Hope your current assignment is meeting your needs. Wanted you to know that your expertise may be required for consultation on an emerging situation. Nothing immediate, but complete retirement may not be sustainable. We'll be in touch if developments warrant your input. Her eyes stayed on the screen long after the words stopped glowing. The calm she had built for 6 months cracked like thin glass. She deleted the email, cleared the cache, closed the laptop, but it was too late. The silence of her quarters had shifted, the ghost stirred. For 6 months she had been teaching herself how to be ordinary again, to wake without scanning every corner of the room, to sleep without planning an exit route, to measure her days in firing pins, not human lives. But the message had reminded her of the truth. She wasn't here by accident. She was here because people like her never really retired. They were kept on a shelf like weapons in an armory, polished, waiting. And sooner or later, someone always came to take them off the rack. Leaned forward, elbows on the desk, her face buried in her hands. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself, forcing her heartbeat to slow. She had been expecting this. Deep down, she had always known. But knowing didn't make it easier. She reached for her phone again, staring at its last message. The words glowed soft and human in the dim light. Hope all is well. Typed a reply she didn't send. I wish you knew how much of my life is missing. I wish I could tell you the truth, but the truth would ruin us both. Instead, she deleted the draft, powered off her phone, sat in silence. Outside, the base was quiet. Soldiers in barracks, guards at gates, engines idling somewhere in the distance. To them, it was just another night. Safe, routine. To her, it was something else. A countdown. What do you do when the world asks you to return to the life you've been trying so hard to leave behind? Knew the knock before it came. She heard the faint shuffle of polished boots outside the armory door, the pause of someone rehearsing their words before stepping in. She didn't look up when the handle turned. She simply kept working, sliding the bolt from another rifle with clean precision. "Good morning, Specialist," General Harrison said. His voice carried less command today, more caution, like a man approaching a lion's cage without knowing if the bars were locked. Set the bolt on the bench, then glanced at him. "General." He pulled a chair over, sitting across from her workstation, his posture more deliberate than yesterday. He wasn't here for routine oversight. He was here for something heavier. She could see it in the way his eyes lingered on her hands, as though trying to reconcile the calm mechanic in front of him with the shadowed history her file refused to reveal. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he began, "and I've also been in contact with people in Washington." His eyes flicked up briefly. "And what did they tell you?" "They told me that you represent a significant investment. Skills, experience, training that shouldn't be left idle. They told me there are emerging situations." There it was, the words she had been waiting for, the words she had dreaded. "Emerging situations," she repeated, returning her attention to the firing pin. "There are always situations, always threats. The question is whether they truly require me, or whether someone simply wants to pull an old lever because they know it works." The general hesitated. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This isn't routine. It's not a drill or a training exercise. Intelligence agencies have identified an arms-dealing network operating across multiple countries. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria. They're not just selling small arms. They're moving surface-to-air missiles, advanced explosives, even chemical components." Still, the firing pin balanced between her fingers. Harrison pressed on. "Every time conventional forces get close, the targets vanish. It's a network with layers of counterintelligence, sophisticated, professional, and dangerous. We need someone who can work in shadows, someone who doesn't need constant oversight, someone who can adapt." For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then placed the firing pin down gently, her movements precise, her voice sharper now. "What you're describing isn't a mission. It's a web. Do you know what it takes to dismantle something like that?" The general didn't answer. She did. Months of preparation, deep infiltration, building identities that can survive scrutiny, mapping supply chains, finances, relationships. It's not just pulling a trigger, it's dismantling an organism. One mistake and it regrows somewhere else, or worse, it explodes in your face. Harrison nodded slowly. He wasn't arguing, he was waiting. Looked him in the eye. If I were to consider it, and I'm not saying I am, I would need full autonomy. No micromanagement, no handlers second-guessing me from behind desks. I plan, I execute, I report only when it's done. That can be arranged, Harrison said. She arched an eyebrow. Unlimited access to intelligence, satellite imagery, intercepts, financial records, everything. If I'm walking into a storm, I'm not doing it blind. Also possible. And most important, clear objectives. None of this open-ended, do what you can nonsense. Tell me what success looks like, and I'll tell you if it's achievable. I won't walk into a war that doesn't know its own rules. The general sat back, nodding slowly. He had expected pushback. He hadn't expected clarity so sharp it cut the air between them. You're negotiating like someone who's already decided, he said softly. His expression didn't change, but her fingers betrayed her, tapping once against the steel of the rifle. I'm not deciding, she said. I'm outlining reality, and the reality is this. I've spent 6 months learning how to sleep again. 6 months trying to be human. You're asking me to set that down, to step back into a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. That strips you of everything except precision. And once I go back, her voice faltered for the first time. I don't know if I'll come out again. Harrison's eyes softened just for a moment. You may not have a choice, specialist. These people, this network, they're preparing for something catastrophic. If they succeed, thousands of innocents will die, and the only thing standing between them and success might be you. Her jaw tightened. She hated that he was right. The general rose slowly, tucking the manila folder back under his arm. Think about it. I'll have the intelligence package delivered to you by morning. Watched him leave, the door closing with a heavy clang. She sat in silence, the armory stretching wide and empty around her. The rifles waited in their racks, obedient, predictable, but her mind wasn't on them anymore. It was already pulling threads. Satellite access, financial routes, supply chains across borders, methods of infiltration. It wasn't choice, it was instinct. The operator in her hadn't died, she had just been sleeping. And now she was waking up. Closed her eyes, pressing her palms against the cold steel of the workbench. For 6 months she had built a fragile peace, and with one conversation it was already breaking apart. What do you see when you finally open the envelope that could take your life apart? The package arrived at dawn, sealed in layers of security tape, carried by a courier who demanded 3 different forms of identification before releasing it. Signed her name in silence, her hand steady even as her stomach tightened. She carried it back to her quarters like it weighed more than steel, sat at her desk, cut it open. Inside, dozens of documents, photographs, data sheets, satellite imagery, communication intercepts, financial records, dossiers stamped with red classification marks. The kind of information that usually lived behind locked servers and closed doors. The kind of information you only handed to someone when you wanted them to act. Spread the contents across the desk, her fingers moving with the same mechanical precision she used in the armory. But this wasn't steel and oil. This was flesh and blood, chaos and consequence. The first photo stopped her. A cargo plane, grainy, parked on a dirt strip in Somalia, crates being unloaded. On the manifest, surface-to-air missiles, enough to bring down a commercial airliner, enough to make entire nations bleed. The next, communications transcripts. A cell in Afghanistan arranging shipment of chemical precursors. Agents that could poison water supplies, contaminate entire neighborhoods without a single bomb being planted. Another, financial ledgers. Money laundering through shell corporations, legitimate businesses masking illegal trades, names connected to names. threads weaving into a net too wide for conventional law enforcement to cut. Her eyes flicked from page to page, the rhythm of analysis returning like an old heartbeat. This wasn't just an arms network. This was a corporation of death, sprawling across continents, adapting faster than governments could keep up. She forced herself to slow down, categorizing, building a mental map. Supply lines, middlemen, safe houses, weak points. Every detail filed away, patterns forming beneath the noise. But the deeper she read, the more her chest tightened. Because this wasn't theoretical, this wasn't distant, this was preparation. Weapons already in transit, deals already made, timelines already closing. She set one photo down, an image of a crowded airport, overlaid with intelligence suggesting a possible target. Hundreds of civilians moving beneath fluorescent lights, dragging luggage, sipping coffee, hugging families, oblivious to the idea that their lives might depend on whether or not someone like her stepped back into the shadows. Pressed her palms against the desk, closing her eyes. For months, she had been learning how to breathe without weight pressing on her lungs. For months, she had been trying to believe in silence, in predictability, in a life measured by rifles serviced and not by ghosts carried. But here it was again, the truth she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed, she looked down. Yep. Her sister's text was simple as always. Random question, have you thought about what you'll do after the army? I know some people who help with transitions. Civilian jobs, easier life. Stared at the screen, her chest tightening in a different way. What could she say? That she dreamed of a future where she could fix things that didn't bleed. That she wanted to be someone her sister could sit beside without flinching. That she wanted to build instead of dismantle. Instead, she typed, still figuring that out. Skills don't exactly translate, but thanks for thinking of me. She hit send, set the phone down, stared again at the photos spread across her desk. Skills don't translate, but sometimes they don't need to. Sometimes they're the only line between order and catastrophe. She picked up another report, eyes narrowing as she traced the flow of money through offshore accounts. Her brain had already slipped into operational mode, analyzing like it had never stopped, identifying gaps, weak points, entry paths. And with every detail she uncovered, the fragile walls she had built around herself crumbled further. She wanted peace, she wanted silence, she wanted to be ordinary. But she wasn't ordinary. And the world wasn't peaceful. By the time she pushed the files aside, hours had passed. The sun had shifted high in the sky, shadows stretching across her quarters. Her coffee had gone cold. Her body ached from sitting rigid too long. But her mind was sharp, awake, alive in the way it only ever was when she was working the impossible. She hated it, and she craved it. Leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The truth was simple, even if she didn't want to admit it. She couldn't walk away. Not from this. Not when she had seen what was coming. The general had been right. The rifles she maintained would save soldiers, lives one by one. But this could save thousands at once, maybe tens of thousands. And no one else was going to do it, not like she could. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from, whatever you decide, just remember, you've already done enough. You don't have to keep proving anything. Let the words sink in. They were meant as comfort, but to her they cut like a blade because she knew the truth. She hadn't done enough. Not yet. Not if this network was still out there, arming killers with weapons that could burn cities. She stood abruptly, pushing the chair back, walked to the small mirror above her sink, stared at her reflection. For months she had looked like a soldier on the sidelines, oil stains on her hands instead of blood, quiet eyes instead of sharp ones. But in the mirror now she saw something else, the old focus, the old fire, the part of herself she had been trying to bury. And she knew. The choice was already made. What happens when the quiet life you built was only ever a pause? 3 days. That's how Long gave herself. 72 hours of silence, of packing the armory before dawn, of staring at files spread across her desk until her eyes blurred. 72 hours of pretending she still had a choice. On the morning of the third day, she walked across the parade ground to the administrative building. The sky was gray, the kind of colorless dawn that felt suspended, waiting. Soldiers jogged in formation along the path, their voices cutting the air in rhythm. Moved against them, steady, alone. General Harrison was waiting inside. He didn't smile when she entered. He didn't try to mask the gravity in his face. He simply nodded. "Specialist." "General." He gestured to a chair. She sat, hands folded on the table, posture composed. She didn't bother with hesitation. "I'll take the assignment." The general's eyes flickered with something, relief maybe or respect, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. "My conditions remain the same," she said. "Operational autonomy. I plan, I execute, I report after, not during." Harrison nodded. "Unlimited access to intelligence. Satellite feeds, financial trails, intercepts. I won't work blind." "Granted." "And clear objectives. No vagueness. No politics disguised as missions. Tell me what needs to be done, nothing more." Harrison leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "That's exactly why you were chosen, because you demand clarity." Exhaled softly, though it felt more like surrender than relief. "This isn't a commitment I make lightly," she said. "You should understand what it means for me, for the way I live." Harrison's expression softened. "I do." But he didn't, not really. No one could. When she left the office, her decision hung over her like new armor. Heavy, unforgiving, but necessary. That evening she began to prepare. Her alarm shifted earlier, dragging her out of bed before dawn. She ran the perimeter of the base in silence, lungs burning, muscles stretching awake. She moved through combat drills in the gym, reacquainting herself with a body that remembered more than it forgot. Push-ups. Core work until her arms shook, sweat dripping like penance. Her hands found weapons again, not for repair but for use. She disassembled and reassembled rifles at speed, blindfolded, timing herself against the clock. She reacquainted herself with sidearms, with the weight of a pistol balanced in her grip, with the clean snap of a trigger reset. At the range, she lay prone again for the first time in months. Scope to eye, breath slowing, trigger breaking like glass. The targets fell one by one, the rhythm returning like an old song she had tried to forget. By the end of the week, her groups were tight, her confidence sharper. But the hardest part wasn't physical. It was psychological. For months, she had trained her mind to step away from hypervigilance, to live in routine, to trust silence. Now she had to reverse it all, to reactivate the instincts she had buried, to see every corner of a room as a potential threat again, to listen not just to voices but to what they didn't say, to think 3 moves ahead of every person she met. It was like putting on a uniform that no longer fit, and realizing it still belonged to her anyway. Her last day in the armory was quiet. She moved through her rifles with the same precision as always, cleaning, checking, documenting. But each click of steel felt heavier, each pin sliding into place a small goodbye. Sergeant stopped by as she was logging her final reports. "Word is you're being transferred," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Special testing duties," replied evenly. Studied her for a moment. He was no fool. He had seen enough in his years to know when a cover story was just that, but he didn't press. "Whoever replaces you won't keep the same standards," he said simply. "People like you don't come along often." Allowed herself the faintest of smiles. "It's been good work, honest work. I hope they understand that." When he left, the silence of the armory returned. She sat for a long time at her bench, hands resting on the steel surface. This place had been her refuge, her therapy. Every firing pin she'd aligned, every spring she'd calibrated, had been a step back towards something resembling normal. And now she was leaving it behind. She stood slowly, securing her tools one last time, walked the rows of rifles, fingertips brushing over their stocks like a final blessing. She thought of the soldiers who would carry them, the firefights they might face, the trust they would place in the steel she had cared for. It wasn't meaningless, none of it was. But her path lay elsewhere now. That night as she packed her duffel, her phone buzzed. Again. Hope your new assignment goes well. Remember, you're making a difference even if you don't see it. Stared at the words, her throat tightening. Didn't know how true they were. Didn't know the difference her sister's work made or the shadows it came from. And she never would. Typed back a simple reply, thanks, I'll do my best. Then she set the phone aside, zipped her bag and sat in silence. She had wanted peace. She had touched it briefly in the hum of the armory and the quiet of routine, but peace wasn't hers to keep. Her war was calling her back. And this time she knew it might not let her go again. What do you pack when you know you may never come back? Zipped her duffel before dawn, her movements calm, deliberate. One set of civilian clothes, 2 changes of fatigues, a sidearm she had cleaned until it gleamed, a journal, blank pages waiting to carry what she could never say out loud. That was all. Her quarters were bare again, stripped of every trace of her, as if she had never been there at all. When the knock came, she was ready. Transport waiting, the young lieutenant said. His voice was polite, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. He didn't know who she was, not really. To him, she was just another specialist being reassigned. Nodded, slinging the duffel over her shoulder. She left without a word. The vehicle carried her across the base, through gates that had grown familiar, past barracks and drill fields where life continued as usual. To those soldiers, today was another day. To her, it was a threshold. The briefing room was smaller than she expected. No grand displays, no crowded tables. Just General Harrison, 2 intelligence officers, and a screen that glowed with satellite imagery. Harrison stood as she entered. Specialist, thank you for coming. She placed her bag by the chair and sat. Her posture was still, her face unreadable. The lights dimmed. The first image appeared, a convoy on a desert road, crates covered by tarps. This, Harrison said, is what we're calling Operation Iron Veil, a distributed arms network operating across 4 continents. Their shipments include small arms, surface-to-air missiles, and, he paused, glancing at her, components for chemical dispersal. His jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. They're protected, one of the intel officers added. Layers of cutouts, shell companies, smuggling routes. Every time we cut one head off, 2 more appear. We believe central coordination exists, but we don't know where. Leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the screen. She was already mapping patterns, scanning for vulnerabilities, measuring the way threads connected. What's the objective? She asked. Identification of the central hub, Harrison said. Destabilize the network at its source. You will not be asked to dismantle every cell, that would take years. But if you cut out the brain, the body collapses. Clear, defined, achievable. And the rules, she pressed. Harrison met her gaze. You set them. You'll have access to all intelligence resources. You will operate under deep cover, reporting only at intervals of your choosing. No interference. Exhaled softly, the sound almost lost in the hum of the projector. The intel officer clicked to the next slide, names, faces, dossiers. Smugglers, financiers, middlemen, some known, most shadows. Studied them silently, memorizing, building the beginnings of a mental map that would expand and sharpen in the field. But even as her mind engaged, another part of her stood apart, watching the moment she crossed the line, watching the door she was closing behind her. When the lights came back on, Harrison spoke again. You'll leave in 48 hours. Transit through Ankara. Your contact there will brief you on your first lead. After that, you're on your own. Nodded once, nothing more needed to be said. As the others filed out, Harrison lingered. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Looked at him, steady and unflinching. You wouldn't have brought me here if that were true. For a moment they stood in silence. A general who carried the weight of command, a soldier who carried the weight of choice, and between them an understanding neither could name. When she left the building, the sky was bleeding into evening. The base lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the ground. She walked past the armory one last time, her steps slowing. Through the windows she saw soldiers moving inside, young, fresh, laughing as they worked. Their certainty that their battles were still simple, still defined by drills and routines. Her battles had never been simple, and never would be. She stood for a moment longer, then turned away. That night in her quarters, she opened her journal, wrote one line across the first page. Numbers don't tell the truth, they never did, but choices do. She closed the book, placed it in her duffel, and lay on her bed. Sleep didn't come. It rarely did before missions, but she didn't fight it. She simply lay there, listening to the silence. His last message still glowed on her phone. Remember, you've already done enough. Let the words sit in her chest, heavy and impossible. Then she powered the phone off, setting it face down. The world outside her window was quiet, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way. Because peace wasn't hers to keep. She had been built for precision, for choices that left no room for error, for missions that lived and died in silence. And as the hours slid toward dawn, one truth crystallized in her mind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.